This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Paul Dickerson.
Hi, I'm Paul Dickerson, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. This week, Robyn Knocke reports in from Austin. Her first guest, Brewster McCracken, former Harris County prosecutor, former Austin City Councilman, and now Executive Director of Pecan Street, Inc., a smart grid, clean energy R&D organization focused on testing new products, conducting field trials, all to help enable the smart grid. Next up, Pike Powers, a leader in Central Texas, a master of economic development, and now the namesake of the Pike Powers Commercialization Lab. All that right after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply, or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show.
Hi, I'm Robyn Knocke. Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. Today, I'm with Brewster McCracken, the Executive Director of Pecan Street, Inc. Welcome, Brewster. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Robyn. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, tell us about Pecan Street and kind of some of your goals and what the organization is doing today.
We're a university industry research consortium headquartered at the University of Texas. We focus on consumer field trials and commercialization of emerging technologies and products in this smart grid space primarily. But that includes big data, wireless networks, software, and distributed energy systems.
Explain some of this data acquisition, big data terminology for us. We hear it a lot, and I think most people don't really understand what it is.
We've entered an era where cloud computing is making it possible to do all sorts of new types of consumer services with better information. What's happened inside of people's homes to the residents and to companies trying to develop solutions for the residents, it's all been kind of a veil before. So what we've gone out and done in our consumer field trials with volunteer participants is we installed data acquisition systems such as wireless data networks to pick up signal signatures of the refrigerator versus the air conditioner versus the television.
Okay.
Another model actually attaches clamps to the circuit panel. Another model simply uses a smart meter on the side of the house and pairs it with what's similar to like a home Wi-Fi router.
Okay.
All of these systems use existing technologies, but what they do now is they're leveraging a capability that wasn't even around 3 years ago, and that is the ability to report this data into these array of consumer servicing cloud systems that can actually take that information, turn around, and provide home applications and products and services.
Do something with it.
That's right.
Very good. Thank you. That's helpful. It is kind of a confusing space that's sometimes hard for the average person to understand. Now, tell us about some of the research projects y'all are engaged in.
We've created the nation's deepest ever consumer research on home resident electricity and natural gas usage and also water usage. We're developing with that data an unprecedented portrait and understanding of the problems that people are trying to solve in their homes and what are the areas where there are repeated problems that status quo solutions don't do a very good job of solving. Here's an example.
Okay.
We found out that even in new green built homes that there was a big percentage of those homes that had leaking ducts or some problem with their ventilation system.
Okay.
But the systems we have in our homes don't tell us when we have a leaking duct or that we have a problem with insulation or leaking windows. It turns out there are 3 ways you could go about figuring that out. One would be to hire a firm to tint off your house and run pressurized blower tests every year, and you'd be out of your house all day.
Simple project.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Option 2 would be to install a sensor network that could read this from the airflows inside of the inside of the ducts, what are the flow rates and temperature differentials and things like that. That's probably not going to happen either.
Sounds expensive.
Yeah, and it could happen someday, but we're definitely not there now. The third way would be to simply take the data feed off of a smart meter or a sensor plugged into a wall, and just have an algorithm read that data and pick up changes in the level of usage and just spit back out to you, hey, you've got a duct leakage, or it's time to change the air filter, or you probably need to have your air conditioner fixed.
So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of what's happening today.
Right, you use people's electricity data to do something useful for them that they have a hard time getting done now. And it would be something as simple as, we have a joke about apps that could emerge. And so one thing is that if you're the parents of high school age kids and you leave town for the weekend, on Saturday night at 10:30 at night, you get a text on your smartphone from an app, and it says,
oh, no.
And it says, in the last hour, your toilet is flushed 45 times. Well,
there might be a party going on.
That's right. I mean, you know your water bill, but you also have some other insights of what's happening at home.
Dang for the high schoolers.
I think the smart grid may be called the loss of freedom for high school kids, right?
So let's talk about some of the electric vehicle research that y'all are doing and the penetration rates that y'all have in the Miller community.
We have the nation's highest residential concentration of electric cars from people who have gone out and bought electric cars with their own money. We've offered a research stipend that's either $3,000 for a lease or $7,500 for a purchase. Wow. And with that, the folks that participate in the research trials, they buy the rest of it, and they participate in our research for 2 to 3 years. With that information, we're able to understand what happens to the stability of an electric distribution system when you have an electric car plugged in at 5:30 on a summer afternoon, for example, and that 4 of your neighbors also have that happen. Now, that's clearly going to not happen in very many places anytime soon. But what we know from what happened with hybrid cars is that in every big city in the United States, there were 2 to 5 neighborhoods in every utility service territory that had 15 to 25% hybrid vehicle penetration within 3 years. And so, in other words, with electric cars, if that has the same pattern of adoption as hybrid cars did, which
it's going to matter.
Yeah, because suddenly a utility will face this problem, and if they face it even on one distribution feeder, they need to know how to deal with it, because if you bring down one distribution feeder, it can have a cascade effect in the whole system.
Are you seeing data off of this distribution feeder that indicates that there's something you can do to help solve the problem?
Let's put this in context of why it matters to understand electric vehicle charging. On a typical home on a hot summer afternoon, the instantaneous draw for an air conditioner is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 kilowatts. That's how much is drawn at any given time.
Okay.
The next biggest load in the house is typically either a washer dryer, which draws somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 watts, or a plasma TV may draw as much as 300 watts. But you're talking 5 to 7.5% as much as a typical air conditioner pulling its full draw. Electric cars come along and they draw about 3.3 kilowatts. So they are drawing almost the same amount
as your air conditioner.
Exactly. And there's nothing else even close in the home. This is the biggest new electric load to show up in people's homes in half a century.
It does drastically affect our peak usage.
It could. One of the things we want to understand is what do people do in terms of charging behaviors? Do they all charge at 5:30 in the afternoon or 6? Or does it kind of work out in the wash because people get home later and get home earlier? So it's real early so far. But from the early data we've seen, the good news is that there is quite a bit of it working out in the wash. So far, in the first couple months of data, we've seen that peak time of charging has been more around 9 o'clock at night, because that's when it kind of piles up.
Everybody's home.
That's right.
Yep.
But you could see a scenario if you have a certain community where everybody tends to work for the same employer with a real rigorous schedule, that might be altered, say, like on a military base or something.
So I guess my question is, what does smart grid mean for the entrepreneur? Where is the opportunity? And if there was an entrepreneur standing in front of you and they said, Brewster, where would you go with the smart grid? What would you tell them?
Say home apps.
Okay.
Think of the App Store for the home. We hear over and over, oh God, people aren't that interested in managing their electric bill, and that is true. But electricity and natural gas data and even water data tell us a lot more than simply what your electric bill is. As an example, my brother and sister-in-law and their air conditioner caught on fire 2 weeks ago because it turned out that there was a lack of a grounded wire that if you had electricity data, that would have been picked up 3 years ago before they had to spend thousands of dollars and nearly had the risk of their house burned down.
Right.
So things that data does in terms of electricity and gas, water data, it can tell you if you have a water leak or a gas leak.
And this is data for us to use as the end user, not always the utilities.
Exactly.
It's private data.
We're looking at the emergence of third-party apps. Just think of, in the same way that GPS and internet data have merged on smartphones to provide all sorts of new kinds of apps for that on Android and Apple smartphones. Well, what problems could you solve for people in their homes with better information that could then help them find out ways to be more comfortable or safer or other ways to improve their lives?
So what's next for Pecan Street? Do we continue down the path that we're going? Is there a new path that you're looking at taking?
We are 2 or 3 months away from opening the Pike Powers Commercialization Lab, less than 2 miles from the UT campus. And this is a commercialization lab to benefit startups and faculty and students coming out of the University of Texas and the startup community here in the Austin Round Rock metro area. This is a place that links in with the Advanced Computing Center of the University of Texas and with our original consumer research from the participants in our field trials. So this provides a really unique asset for entrepreneurs and innovators to come test their ideas, iterate them, commercialize them, and be able to walk out with proofs of concept and validation reports.
Nice, so it's full circle. Back to the university.
That's right. Universities have the potential to become engines of innovation.
Right.
And in particular, if you look at places like Stanford and MIT,
right,
they respectively, MIT started venture capital firms. Stanford created Silicon Valley. San Diego, University of California, San Diego, largely is responsible for creating the global wireless industry and offering a major contribution to global life sciences innovation. We have a track record that universities can be big catalysts for opportunities all the way from startups to big companies. University of Texas has had a lot of those pieces in place, but they've never actually had a place for a rubber meets the road facility where the great ideas emerging out of young people's minds and out of the labs and out of the startup community here in Austin can all come together.
Wow. Thank you. You've shared a lot in a very short period of time. Sounds like y'all are on to some pretty cool activities. We appreciate you coming in, Brewster.
Thanks, Robyn. Thanks for having me.
All right, that wraps up our discussion with Brewster McCracken. We'll be right back after this.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show.
Hi, I'm Robyn Knocke. Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. Today, I'm with a very special guest, Pike Powers, the godfather of economic development in Central Texas. probably in Texas. I don't know. We'll start with Central Texas.
Who am I
Thanks
to
for being here, Pike.
quarrel with whatever you say, Ron?
Oh, Pike, it's so good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I want you to take us back to the beginning of commercialization, entrepreneurship, economic development here in Central Texas. Let's talk about MCC. First off, tell me what that stands for, because we all forget in this community.
Well, it stands for Microelectronics and Computer Technology Corporation, which was a brainchild of a guy named Bill Norris of Control Data Corporation in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And he had the notion that all the technology companies ought to come together and work collegially, cooperatively, collaboratively to do some basic research that would make the United States of America more competitive in a whole variety of technologies. And bottom line, Texas and Austin competed in 1983 against 57 cities in 27 states, and somehow miraculously we won. So
I don't think it's miraculous. I think it's through hard work of some people, including yourself.
Well, we were awfully lucky. I mean, we were not on anybody's map before that, and thereafter we were. So it made a huge difference. In the old days, as I like to refer to them, reporters would call from the New York Times or the Boston Globe or the LA Times, and they would say, "Where is Austin?" And I said, "Is it in the center of the state?" And I said, "Yes, it is." "Is it the state capital?" "Yes, it is." You know, now you don't have to tell anybody where Austin is. They all know. They're all here, or they want to be here, or they find some way to visit their friends here.
So Pike, what are your feelings about the Pike Powers Commercialization Lab?
Well, you know, obviously I'm excited about it. I mean, who wouldn't be after you've sort of worked on the things I've worked on? But at the heart of it, though, the point that I think we're all collectively trying to make is that it's terribly important that we take the things we learn at the university and other places as well in the chain and stream of commerce, particularly clean tech and things that are going to improve lives for the long term, and that we do our dead level best to take what we've learned and apply it, take the basic research and apply it, and do it in a way where we generate a whole stream of new products, goods, services, companies that not only leaven the playing field in terms of better ways to live and work, but also keeps us with a sustainable economy for the long term in our region.
No, I think you're right. It's not, I mean, it's a research lab, but it's about commercializing that research to...
Right. Well, it's all about transferring it and making things out of it, making things happen with it, and making your community and your region sustainable, not just for the next couple of years or 2 or 3, but for the long term. So the real legacy is something way beyond anything I can probably figure out right now, because this effort with the smart grid is unique, to have what we have and do what we're doing with who we're doing it with. And so I think we're going to be a real trendsetter here. I'm not afraid to make some mistakes or goof up. I mean, you can't go anywhere unless you're willing to take a risk. And I think we're going to do that. We're going to do that in spades. And people are going to say, wow, what are those guys doing down there? I'm going to say, we're excited to be alive and well in Austin, Texas, doing things that make a real difference. Come on in, the water's fine.
Pike, you have a very special place in my heart. Thank you for joining me today. That wraps up this episode of The Energy Makers Show, heard on the radio and seen online at TheEnergyMakers.com.